So awareness is brought back into your space. Eyes gently open if they're not already. Moving, wriggling the fingers, making movements with the body. So welcome if you're joining us live. And then I know that there are a few people who who watch these recordings as well. So hello to all of you. So here we are, it's in session 3 of this series. In which we're going to look at the topic of that's known in Western philosophy, at least, as epistemology, or the study of knowledge. How and what do we know? So, in some respects, quite an abstract topic to deal with. But I think a very important one, because gaining some clarity on how we can know things, and if we really can know anything at all for certain, would seem to be very important. So hopefully you can see the slides. So first of all, what is epistemology? So this is a word that's, like all terms in philosophy, is derived from the Greek episteme. Is that how you pronounce it?
Episteme.
Episteme?
Yeah, episteme.
Yeah. Knowledge, and logos, which can be translated as reason, or sometimes it's translated as the science of, or the study of.
Can it mean the word as well?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that is true. Yeah. Good point. So one way you can define this term is the philosophical study of the nature, the origin, and the limits of human knowledge. And this subject aims to answer such questions as, what do we know? What does it mean to say that we know something? And what makes justified beliefs justified? And how do we know that we know? Those are the kinds of questions that are asked. So, as always in these sessions, we begin just by very, very briefly looking at what the Western tradition, usually specifically the ancient Greek tradition, has to say about these questions. So as we saw last time, the earliest known philosophers appeared to be mostly concerned with questions of ontology. That is, of what exists. As time went by, however, philosophy in the West tended to shift towards questions of epistemology, leaving explanations of the nature of reality to scientists, what we now call scientists. Now, one of the earliest Western thinkers to deal with the nature of knowledge was Plato. And Plato drew a sharp distinction between knowledge, which is certain, and mere belief or opinion, which is not certain. Opinions derive from the shifting world of sensation, whereas knowledge derives from this world of timeless forms or ideas. So these are, you often hear these called Platonic forms or Platonic ideas. So Platonic epistemology holds that knowledge of these Platonic forms is innate, so that learning is the rediscovery or recall of ideas that are buried deep in the soul. So, as you may know, Plato believed in a form of reincarnation, so this also can help explain why some people display a certain mastery of forms of knowledge or art from a very early age, because they're accessing this knowledge from a previous lifetime. So another stream of thought, epistemic skepticism, questions whether knowledge is even possible at all. So the oldest known form of skepticism in the West is called, can you help me with that word? Pyrrhonism.
Yeah.
Pyrrhonism, after its founder, Pyrrho of Elis. So now what is really interesting is that we know for sure that this Pyrrho, is that how you pronounce it? Travelled to India with Alexander the Great's army, where he is said to have studied with Indian ascetics, who the Greeks knew as gymnosophists. Helpful to have a Greek with you for this. Which I believe means naked philosophers. Yeah. Relating to the fact that many of these ascetics indeed would have worn either very little or nothing at all. And he was said to have been influenced by Buddhist teachings. So therefore, we might conjecture that skepticism was imported to the West at this early stage from these encounters. So, in brief, Pyrrhonists, I just can't get it, sorry, claim that for any arguments for a non-evident proposition, an equally convincing argument for a contradictory proposition can be produced. Thus, no certain knowledge can be attained. For anything, i.e., that's not certain, there's always a different point of view. So this school proposes that the best way to achieve ataraxia, is that correct?
Yeah.
Well, that's an ancient Greek word that refers to a state of equanimity or tranquility in the mind. And I would speculate that it has some similarities with like the Indian concept of samadhi, or even yoga itself, this state of mental tranquility. Different Greek thinkers argued how best you could achieve that state, but it was generally agreed that such a state was a good one to achieve.
So like Patanjali's Chitta Vritti Nirodha.
Yes,
That sort of thing.
yes, I think you can make a case. I mean, it's referring to a similar kind of an idea. Anyway, so this school believed that suspending all judgment and opinion and avoiding all dogmas was the best way of achieving this state. So I'm not quite sure how widespread that school was in ancient Greece. I mean, my experience that telling Greeks that they shouldn't have opinions and argue wouldn't go down very well.
We like a good debate.
Yeah, but obviously, I mean, it must have been a popular enough school to have survived.
So does it say how you get into that state of ataraxia? Does it give practices, or has it been lost how he did it?
Well, I mean, I can't go into great detail, but again, it's all about this suspension of judgment and
so the school have like
and avoiding dogma.
So do they school have ways of training people to do that?
Well, I'm not too sure about that. I'd have to look that up, or it's possible that we just don't know enough about it. to be sure about that. I suppose it's possible. So we're moving on a bit later in time here. In the Enlightenment period, Western philosophy became broadly divided into two strands. And that's the strands known as rationalism and empiricism, which both held very different notions about how we gain knowledge. So the predominant theme of rationalism is that concepts and knowledge can be gained independently of sense experience, thus emphasizing the power of the mind over the senses. So very much a focus on just focusing inward on the mind, and we can come to knowledge that way. Empiricism, in contrast, focuses very much on the role of experience, especially experience based on perceptual observation by the senses in the generation of knowledge. And of course, it was really in this empiricism grew along with the growth of Western science. Really. So the philosopher Immanuel Kant, you may have heard of him, sought to reconcile these two strands. This is what he's mostly famous for. For Kant, we experience things and we thereby gain knowledge, but simultaneous with each experience is the working of the mind as it interprets and categorizes that knowledge. So there's certain pre-existing, a priori, as it's called, concepts that exist within the mind. So therefore, our understanding of reality is a product of the synthesis of rationalism and empiricism. So we're moving now to look at Indian philosophy more specifically. So in classical Indian thought, the discipline known as epistemology is summed up in this Sanskrit notion of pramana. One cannot expect to possess valid knowledge without first having some means or way of apprehending it. And the means for such knowledge is pramana. And of course, if you were here for the first session, we did already have a quick look at these in that first session. But to recap, here are the four most widely accepted pramanas, or means of knowledge. So we have pratyaksha, perception. So that is what we perceive, not just with the eyes, but with all of the senses. And then we have anumana, which is inference. So drawing upon perception to come to further conclusions using logical means. We'll have a closer look at that in a moment. And then we have shabda, or testimony. So this is the words of an expert or a teacher or a scripture. And then fourth, we are not accepted by all schools by all means, but by some of them we have upamana, or comparison. Again, we'll have a closer look in a moment. So journeying through what the various schools had to say about this issue. So first looking at the Nyaya School of thought. So this is one of the Vedic or Astika schools. So Nyaya literally means that by which one is led to a conclusion or correct reasoning. It is also referred to as Tarka Sastra, which means the science of reasoning. It's, as I mentioned back in that first session, very much there's a focus in this school on reasoning and on logic. The significance of this system lies particularly in its thoroughgoing defense of perceptual realism. Yeah, so going back to our session last time, where we're looking at an ontology, Nyaya is a realist school, just like its sister school, the Vaiseshika. A strong appeal to a pragmatic empiricism. And so that means appeal to the senses and observations. And the school's strong commitment to rational debate and clear and logical argumentation. Essentially, it was this school that established the very system of rules for conducting philosophical debate, which would be followed by the other schools for centuries to come. So according to the Nyaya Sutra, and each of these schools has their own sutra text as its foundation, there are three types of debates. So we have discussion, the highest and preferred form of debate, which is vada in Sanskrit. Then we have disputation, jalpa. And then we have mere destructive criticism, or wrangling, as you might put it, vitanda. The Nyaya, of course, advocated vada as the highest form of debate. So Indian philosophers recognized that throwing arguments at each other without a consideration of the perspective of one's fellow disputant does not yield any furtherance of mutual understanding. And it's something that some modern political debaters could perhaps learn from. Thus, the most skilled debater is the one who has a sound and comprehensive knowledge of his or her opponent's position, as well as their own. So the Nyaya School is particularly well known for the development of logical procedures as a means of establishing correct inference, that means of knowledge called anumana. And the Nyaya Sutra outlines 5 steps that make up an inferential proof. But we won't go into detail about that, as you can see here, chapter 6 of that book, if you want to find out a bit more about Indian logic in general. But generally speaking, one can say that compared to Western logic, which dates back to Aristotle, Indian logic places much more emphasis upon empiricism and upon particularity. In other words, to put it more clearly, one could say it is more practical and relatable to the real world and lived experience than the rather abstract domain that is Western logic. So sometimes Western philosophers are perhaps rightly criticized for engaging in games of logic that have very little relevance to the real world. Furthermore, the standard argument in the Indian system of logic is not deduction, as it is in the West, which seeks to establish irrefutable certainty, but inductive inference. So what's the difference between deduction and induction? So in a nutshell, inductive reasoning moves from specific instances to a generalized conclusion. Yeah, so this is true in this case, this is true in this case. Therefore, once you've observed this same case a number of times, you can come to a general conclusion. Deductive reasoning works the other way around. It's more top-down rather than a bottom-up view, if you like. It moves from generalized principles that are already known to be true to more specific conclusions. So, to be more precise, Indian logic, Nyaya logic, is actually more precisely more of a mix of inductive and deductive reasoning. But what's the practical upshot of this? Well, one can say that unlike in Western philosophy, where you're looking for certainty, in the Indian system, you can never decide that you know for sure. Yeah, so you never completely close yourself to unguessed possibilities. So we now move on to look at the Samkhya and Yoga schools, which we always explore as a pair, just because they are related, but with a focus here on the school of classical yoga. So very early on in the Yoga Sutra, there are a couple of sutras that are particularly relevant to our topic. And these outline the basic epistemology of the Yoga school. So as I write here, I feel that the full import of these sutras are often not fully grasped by those who come to them without a broader understanding of Indian philosophy. So we're looking at them more closely here. So the sutras in question, they appear very early in the text, just after Patanjali has established that the goal of yoga is attaining the state in which there's mental, emotional fluctuations, the vrittis have become still. So that's mostly in sutras number 2 and 3. So in Sutra 1.6, i.e. the 6th sutra in the text, he then goes on to list precisely what these vrittis are, these mental fluctuations. Pramana, viparaya, vikalpa, nidra, smritayaha. So, a translation, reliable knowledge, yeah, that word, pramana, misconception, imagination, sleep, and memory are the 5 kinds of vritti. So you should recognize this word pramana by now, referring to valid and reliable knowledge. So just bearing in mind that in Indian philosophy, the most important item of any list is invariably put first. So this having of reliable knowledge is given paramount importance in the pursuit of yoga. So what does classical yoga then consider to be the valid sources of knowledge? And Patanjali goes on to answer this in the very next sutra, 1.7. Tatra pratyaksha numanagamaha pramananai. Sorry, hard to pronounce that one. But anyway, in translation, of these, reliable knowledge is that which derives from direct perception. You might be able to make out that word pratyaksha, perception, anumana, valid inference, and agama, which is another word meaning testimony. Yeah. So sense perception, and that's placed purposefully again at the top of the list of the pramanas, because the other pramanas are dependent upon it. Now, in his commentary on the Yoga Sutra, Vyasa defines sense perception as being the state of mind, vritti, which apprehends an external object through the channels of the 5 senses. Yeah, the five senses, of course, being sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell. So just to be a bit more specific and a bit more, it gets a little bit technical here, in this yogic theory of perception, sense objects, which have in themselves a tamasic nature, imprint themselves upon the mind, upon the chitta, a bit like imprinting themselves like a stamp or a seal, perhaps.
Well, explain what tamasic is, maybe people don't understand what that means. Tamasic nature.
So there's three principles or qualities in Samkhya and yogic thought: sattva, rajas, and tamas. With the sattvic principle being the principle of lightness and purity and clarity, and the principle of rajas being activity and energy, would you say?
Yes.
And the principle of tamas, meanwhile, being the principle of heaviness or inertia. A quality that is nevertheless, obviously, crucial. So sense objects have this heavy nature. And thereby they imprint themselves upon the mind, and then these are illuminated in the mind by the mind's sattvic nature, the illuminating nature of the mind, as we might put it. So due to pervading the mind, the self, the purusha, the true self, you might call it, then becomes conscious of this mental impression, as if it were taking place within itself. But in actual fact, it's not. It's not taking place in the self. It's been, the impression is imprinted on the chitta, on the mind. Yeah, the mind in yogic philosophy, remembering, and we'll go into more about this next time as well, is separate, is seen as separate to the true self, to the Purusha. And is that understandable?
So what you're saying is
that... is that understandable to others? So I'm just trying to explain here the yogic theory of perception.
So like I watch something on the news, which is tamasic.
Yeah. It imprints itself
on the mind. Yeah. And then my sattvic, my intelligence tries to process that. But it doesn't happen. Then Atma is looking at me doing this. My true self is looking at what is watching me.
The Purusha is never. It's never actually
the seer.
Doing. It's just
the seer is watching
observing.
me. The seer is watching me do this. But it's not this process is not affecting the seer, the Purusha, because it's all happening in the mind. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. Did Tracy, do you get that, Tracy?
Yeah, and if you need further clarity, the next session in this series links to this, because it's all about different conceptions of the self and the mind. So we'll be looking at that next time. So the second pramana recognized by the Yoga School is anumana, inference or logic. And the Yoga basically accepts Nyaya principles here, i.e. that inductive reasoning that I already mentioned. The third and final source of valid knowledge accepted by Patanjali is this thing called agama. So this is essentially another word for shabda or testimony. And this is the relaying of accurate information through the medium of words. It can be either spoken or written, in ancient times more likely to be spoken by a trustworthy person who has perceived or inferred the existence of an object to somebody who has not done so. So, in this case, the words of such a reliable authority, your teacher or your scripture, enter the ear or the eyes, whatever, and produce an image, a vritti, in the mind of the hearer, very much like in perception, the object did the same thing, remember? That corresponds to the vritti experienced by the trustworthy person. So it's like a transmission, as it were, a direct transmission from person to person, teacher to student. The person receiving the information in this manner has neither personally experienced nor has been able to infer the existence of that object of knowledge, but valid knowledge of the object is nonetheless achieved. So this being a Vedic school in its roots, the yoga that is, the most reliable source of testimony of all are those divine scriptures known as the Vedas. So we're now going to move on to look at the Advaita Vedanta school. So what's interesting about this school is that they accepted altogether 6 sources of valid knowledge, more than the other schools. Although all of these means of knowledge, perhaps not, some are perhaps more solid, as it were, than others. But anyway, there's these 3 extra pramanas that we haven't mentioned. So we have upamana, which means a comparison or an analogy to something one already knows, knowing an hitherto unknown thing by virtue of its similarity to an already known thing. So, as an example, imagine you are traveling to a foreign, I think this one is an example taken from the tradition. Imagine you are traveling to a foreign land and a friend tells you that in that land there are creatures that look and behave like cows and yet are not cows. So this knowledge helps you identify the new animal later on. So I'm not sure what people think of that as a grounds for knowledge, maybe not quite as firm and steady as the other 3 means that we've already looked at, perhaps. And then next we have artapati, which means postulation or derivation from circumstances. So again, let's take it best explained with an example. If a person departed in a boat and the time is now past the expected time of arrival, then the circumstances support the truth postulate that the person has arrived. Yeah. However, many scholars consider this pramana as invalid, or at best very weak. After all, there's so many other things that could have happened here. And the boat, for example, may have gotten delayed, diverted, or, well, unfortunately not, but possibly sunk. So maybe a weaker form of ground of knowledge. And finally, we have this thing called anupalabdhi, which means non-perception or negative proof. That's quite interesting. This pramana suggests that knowing a negative, such as there is no jug in this room, or there is no fill in the blank in this room, is in itself a form of valid knowledge. If something can be observed or inferred or proven to be non-existent or impossible, then when you think about it, one does know more than one did without such means.
Science uses that all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
We use
Yeah, that is, yeah, that's true. So having said all of this and having introduced those other means of knowledge, do bear in mind, however, that Advaita Vedanta is a non-dual school, which states that Brahman is the sole reality anyway, and that the empirical phenomenal world is an illusion. Yeah? So as such, these various Pramanas only tell us about vyavaharika, or empirical reality, which is sublated by the paramartika, or this level of absolute truth, the level of Brahman. As far as this ultimate level of reality is concerned, the level of Brahman, then Shabda, or scriptural evidence, is considered to be the only source of valid knowledge. In the case of Advaita Vedanta, or indeed any type of Vedanta, those scriptures include the Upanishads, the Pramanas Sutras, and the Bhagavad Gita. So next, looking at the Carvaka School. So as you may recall, this was an ancient school of Indian materialism. I'm trying to give them their fair due by mentioning them in each session. So the Carvakas were minimalists, epistemologically speaking, holding only pratyaksha, or perception, as the primary and proper source of knowledge. We can only be sure about what our own senses tell us. To the Carvakas, inference is useful, but prone to error, as inferred truths can never be without doubt. Their position can be explained with the example of fire and smoke. So this is one classic example of inductive inference that's given in Indian literature. This one about fire and smoke. When there is smoke, one's tendency may be to leap to the conclusion that it must be caused by fire. While this is often true, it need not be universally true everywhere or all the time, stated the Carvaka scholars. Smoke can have other causes. And in a way, this may be a justified point, because as I explained when we looked at inductive inference, one of the whole points is that we can never know for completely sure in inductive style reasoning. We're just drawing the best conclusion that we can based on the available evidence. Basically, the Carvakas were thoroughgoing empiricists who denied any philosophical claims that could not be verified through direct experience, and that included for them things like soul, rebirth, karma. So now we're having a look at the Ajnana School. Just a tiny bit of history for you. At the time of the Buddha, or maybe slightly before, there was a whole host of groups that emerged in ancient India. Collectively, they're called the Shramans. And there was lots of these groups, actually. But only two of them survived to the present day, Buddhism and Jainism. All the others, for whatever reason, died out along the way. And this is one of their schools, the Ajnanas, so little known that this is the first time I've ever mentioned them in any satsang, actually. We know very little about them, but what we do know is that they'd expressed a very skeptical attitude towards knowledge. So the clue is in their very name. So this name, Jnana, means wisdom or knowledge. And if in Sanskrit, if anything, when you see things preceded with the a or the a, it's pronounced, it literally means a negation of what the word that follows. So in this case, Ajnana means literally without knowledge. So the Ajnana claim that the very possibility of knowledge is doubtful, since so often claims to knowledge were mutually contradictory. And this idea that everybody, for every argument, there's also a counter argument, a different point of view, a different position. So there's a great similarity here to Pyrrhonism, that ancient Greek school of skepticism that we looked at earlier on in the session. Close enough that, I wonder whether Pyrrho himself perhaps met some of these ascetics. So the Ajnana held that it was impossible to obtain knowledge of a metaphysical nature or ascertain the truth value of philosophical propositions. Also, even if knowledge was possible, for them, it seems that it was useless and even disadvantageous for final salvation or final liberation.
So, like things like hard facts, like where the planets are, and that they would negate all of that wasn't true then. Or like maths and...
Well, that's the thing. I'm not entirely clear whether they'd go that far, or whether they're again just talking about like the
more
Pyrrhonic skeptics were about.
Like where do we come from?
About non-evident propositions, so things that aren't matters of fact, as it were.
Like, do we have a soul and things like that?
Yes.
Thank you.
So this skeptical view of knowledge does seem to have been shared, at least to some extent, by the early Buddhists. So the Buddha himself appears to have rejected metaphysical speculations and put aside certain questions which he named the unanswerables, avyakatas, including questions about the soul and if the universe is eternal or not. There's numerous stories where people come up to him and ask him those questions, and he really refuses to answer. The Buddha's epistemological view has been a subject of debate amongst modern scholars. So some have classed him as first and foremost as an empiricist, because of his teaching that knowledge requires verification through the senses. This idea that one should experience for oneself, and not just rely upon what others have told you. However, the Buddha's view of truth was also based on the soteriological. Do you remember that word from the first session?
I do remember the word.
Soteriology is the science of salvation or the science of liberation.
Yeah.
Which is in Buddhism, of course, the ending of suffering, where a belief should only be accepted if it leads to wholesome consequences. So this has led some scholars to see the Buddha's view as a form of what's known as pragmatism. Buddhist epistemology generally recognizes only two valid pramanas, and that's namely perception and inference, accepting scriptural tradition only if it accords with these. This, as I've already alluded to, this is in line with the Buddha's own injunction in the Nyaya Sutra, for example, not to accept anything on mere tradition or scripture. So moving a little bit further on in time, Nagarjuna, he was one of the most influential Buddhist thinkers after the Buddha himself, known for his theory of the emptiness, shunyata, of all phenomena, against those theories which posited an essence or true existence, svabhava, to phenomena. So Nagarjuna was considered a skeptic, and this is because he called into question the basic categorical presuppositions and criteria of proof assumed by almost everyone in the Indian tradition to be axiomatic. To be a point of certainty.
Okay.
So
point of induction.
So basically, all those rules of
karma,
rules of proof that the Nyaya that developed, the Nyaya School, and that the others accepted, were called into question. So,
I like this.
So like doubting everything. Really.
Yeah, like karma, like the soul, questioning everything. That doesn't have like proof.
Yes.
So you can't experience that.
Well, anything really can be. You can be skeptical, of course, about anything.
Well, some things you can't be skeptical about. Like the Earth is round.
Well, yes, but some people
I know some
are
people
skeptical about that. So Nagarjuna believed that doubt should not be haphazard. It required a method, as it did for Descartes. So Descartes is a Western philosopher who, amongst other things, is known for his procedure of systematic doubt or methodological doubt. So Descartes started his project by doubting everything. What can I doubt? What can I not be certain about? And in Descartes' case, that's when he came to his conclusion that the only thing he couldn't doubt was that he was thinking, that he was a thinking thing.
So what was that other philosopher?
I think I think, therefore I am. Famous saying. Obviously, Nagarjuna probably wouldn't have agreed with that. So that the thinking mind was the only thing that could not be doubted. Yeah, am I going to what? So this was as I've put here, a revolutionary innovation really for philosophy in India, this idea of methodical doubt.
Is that the theory of emptiness then? It was methodical doubt.
Yes. So it's quite an interesting one.
Is there a meditation on emptiness?
Not one that I'm particularly an expert in, it has to be said.
Is there a meditation on that one? That practice?
Yeah.
Sunyata, is there a meditation practice to do that?
Yeah, I believe. Yeah, there are forms of meditation right now on sunyata. which, well, you can deliberate upon how that's best to be, on that word sunyata is best to be translated. So, Tracy will be very happy to know that we close, as we did last time, looking at the view of Kashmir Shaivism, or Tantra, or, well, one form of Tantra, I should say. So, Abhinavagupta, so he is often considered the greatest master of Tantric Shaivism. He outlines in the Tantra Sara how the knowing of reality is based upon three supports that have to be in alignment with one another. Yeah, so I think this is quite a good way of looking at things. So the three supports are as follows. Sound and careful reflection on your own experience, and this is called sattaka. And know that this combines both perception and inference together. So what we observe, and then also the inferences that we make based upon those observations. Second support is the guidance of a great teacher, who's skilled in the meditative inquiry and has attained its fruit. This is Sadguru. And then the third support is the wisdom of the scriptures, Sadagama. So it's when these three supports come together in agreement, Abhinava suggests that we know that we have arrived at truth. One or two of them alone is insufficient for certainty. So we have to, at all times, check our own experience of the teachings of a teacher and the teachings of scriptures, but also likewise, one cannot take the teachings of a teacher at just simple face value, but also balance it with your own experiences and the scriptures. And of course, likewise for your reading of the texts themselves, balancing that against the other two. So I'll leave the final words with Harish, because he puts it, as usual, very nicely in this quote. This system of double corroboration for valid knowledge allows us to come up with seeds of wisdom that we can count on and build a spiritual life upon. But the process is not completed until these seeds come to life as living, vibrating wisdom within us. That is, in the Tantra, we seek not just to know wisdom, but to fully embody it. The evidence that you have done so is that you no longer need the external form of the teaching, the words or the concept. It has simply blossomed into living experience, unsupported by any reminders. When this happens, then no matter how beautiful are the words of the teaching, they seem to be flat or pale or inadequate in comparison with the actual experience. So, that's the end of the prepared slides. Has anybody got any reflections or questions they'd like to express?
I like the idea of like validating a point like in three different ways, like they do in Tantra. But then I would question, like, if you're validating that point, and for example, you have like a teacher that is dodgy, or the scriptures that are dodgy, then that's a bad validation of that point, because that happens all the time. So how do you validate a point like over and over again through your own experience and make sure that
It's
that the teacher you have is one that you can trust and has done all the study and not only that, but the scriptures, like I wouldn't validate my point going back to the Vedic scriptures, because some of the things they say in there are really old-fashioned, and like, you know, we don't do sacrifice and stuff like that anymore. So is a tantra a bit old-fashioned?
well, I don't think you'd be. Yeah, maybe you'd probably go to the layer of the Upanishads, perhaps, rather than the older texts.
So, but that happens all the time. Like I see it all the time when people are validating points with sources that are not very good to validate points with. So it's a nice idea, but it's questionable. That's questionable as well, those 3 points.
So is there any other
And I think
supports that you could think of that would add to this?
I don't know, maybe it's my training, but I like the idea of like having a question and you eliminate things until it either supports your question or you creates another theory. I can't remember what that's called in research methodology. I think to like that way of my working, but that's probably just because of how I've been trained at university. No? You didn't do university how you do research from a university point of view, did you?
What, in this presentation? Yeah. No, well, I suppose not.
I don't know. What do you think?
Any other reflections upon that?
And then how does all this relate to our yoga practice? I can understand how it relates if you have like a yogic life. Let's say, for example, you're someone who's new on the path and you receive all this information and you've done asana practice. That's your first experience of yoga. What advice would you give to people? How would you connect this to an asana practice, to a postural practice?
How would I connect? That's a good question.
Because there are many people, as we know, that just believe yoga is postural work, don't they? So how would you make the connect for those people?
What, that the postural work was valid, or that this was the spiritual?
Well, many people don't know about all this, and like, so for example, if you're new, it's very overwhelming, isn't it? So
Yeah.
So how would you make the connection? How is this valid to someone who's very new to yoga and just thinks yoga is postural work? How would you make the connection?
The way that you've made the connection for us, if we wanted to learn about it, is what you do, isn't it? With doing the satsangs and all the rest of it. Because otherwise, I mean, if you'd never done any of this, I'd never have read anything or known anything or anything. But I wanted to know because of all the words that you were using in the classes related to the spiritual, the philosophy side, the spiritual side, and all of that. No?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I'm just trying to think. But it would be, coordinates. How you could incorporate these kinds of questions, in particular, that knowledge into a class situation. I mean, as you know, we do incorporate aspects of philosophy, don't we, into our classes?
Yeah, a little bit. And then I guess it's just down to the individual if they want to seek out more than
I was going to say, it is individual.
Yeah.
Very much.
Thank you.
Very much. Massive.
So we have, as from the next session, we we look at some really juicy topics. So for the next session, for example, looking at notions of the self, or the soul, what's usually referred to as Atman. And then the next session after that, which I've just been doing research about, is the whole question of ethics, the philosophy of ethics. And then a session on, I think I'm planning to do a session on ideas around karma, rebirth. And then a session to finish it all off that's all about the final goal of all of this, about moksha, liberation, and the different paths leading to that. So that's the layout of what's coming.
Fantastic.
And for the few people who watch, some of the people who watch this afterwards, if you've got any questions, feel free to get in touch with me. Anything else?
No, just to say that I still find this all overwhelming. It's hard to get my head around. So I'm assuming lots of people must be finding it.
Well, yeah.
They're so big going through all the yoga, you go through every single every single viewpoint, don't you? And you applied. I find it really hard, sort of thing.
Yes, I mean, and that's maybe what distinguishes this series from others, is that I have tried to look at all the different schools, just because partly I believe that to fully understand one school, you have to really look at what all the others were saying as well, because they were all in some kind of debate with each other. So that's my reasoning behind it.
Yeah, so that's all I would be
saying. And as you know, I've been reading about these things for quite a long time now, so I felt it was time to try and put it all into some kind of reasonably accessible format. But I'm sure I can improve.
No, I think it's brilliant. I'm just saying, if people out there feel overwhelmed, maybe they don't. Maybe it's just me.
No, it's not just. I'm sure it's one bit just you.
So, like, I feel like okay. So, but basically, what I've taken away from this is like there's different schools of Indian philosophy and also Greek philosophy. They had different ways of coming to. They had their own research methodology, so different ways of coming to their own conclusions.
Well, that's one way of putting it. Research methodologies.
Yeah. No, it wasn't.
Yeah, different ways of gaining
knowledge.
In different degrees of confidence. Ranging from the Nyaya and Vaisheshika schools, for example, who were pretty confident that what their knowledge was certain.
Yeah, well,
that they knew the world as it was.
And then others were just really airy-fairy as well.
On the other hand, extreme skepticism.
What you said about the Nyaya schools, about the realization that if they were throwing arguments at one another doesn't yield mutual understanding, and I think from a personal point of view, you know, that's something that, you know, I need to take with me, because it's something that I tend to do. You know, say my bit, and without any sort of realization, or not without realization, but certainly without consideration that it might not be somebody else's truth as well.
I think that that's the way we live now in the 21st century, isn't it? I don't know, I think social media, I think a lot of it's like that though, isn't it? Newspapers, all the sound bites, everything like that. I don't think we're taught to take in other people's views, are we, sort of thing. And also social media tends to funnel us to explore, because of all the algorithms, to have views that are similar to us, so we don't even get challenged in that way. And then if we are confronted, lots of people don't like it, they don't even want to hear it, they walk away or whatever, don't they, sort of thing. So I think it's part of the age that we live in that seems to happen.
Yeah, definitely. A
lot, really, I find. So it's amazing how much has changed. Like over the last, even the last 5 years, I think it's changed loads. How we receive and process information, how we come to conclusions. I find it like hearsay. Like you present like scientific arguments that have been peer reviewed, and people don't even believe that anymore.
No.
So I find that really fascinating that and then people would just base their own opinion on something that they've read in a magazine, and they've done no further research. I find that like fascinating.
Or on a hunch.
Or on a hunch. Yeah, or on a hunch or whatever. It's really interesting, I find, in the last 5 years how much that's changed, really. So yeah. So.
Not just because they like it.
Oh yeah, or just because they like it. Yeah. It's yeah. So I find it fascinating, really.
Yeah.
So it's like Ben said earlier on. I mean, imagine if world leaders had like such a good understanding of the viewpoint of where other world leaders would come from. I mean, it would be such an amazing debate that they could have. And whereas now I just laugh at all of them, because it's just ridiculous what they come out with, really. So
and the sort of, when Ben was saying about in the Indian system, you never decide that you know for sure, so you don't completely close yourself off.
That's beautiful, isn't it? That's really nice, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Gosh.
Imagine if we were all like that, more. Well, yoga practice is supposed to teach us to be more open-minded and open-hearted.
Yeah, definitely.
Don't close yourself off to anything, really. So yeah, very nice. So looking forward to the next one.
Yes.
I just remembered I haven't read that little.
I don't know where you put it. I don't know where you put it after the last.
Yeah, I thought it'd be quite nice to read that in.
Did you put it back in the folder?
Maybe.
Ben's just gone to find something. He'll be back in a moment.
So stop the share now. So if you just come to a still and steady seated pose, and you can now allow the eyes to softly, gently close. So listening to the words of this following prayer of awakening. So this is This is another lovely composition by Harish Wallace, based upon tantric teachings. Om. Salutations to all the saints, sages, siddhas, yoginis, and wisdom masters of all times and spaces. Salutations to my gurus. Salutations to my own blessed self. Awakening is my birthright. It is as inevitable as the sunrise. Now is the time that has been appointed for countless lifetimes. I shall delay no longer. I claim my natural state, basic sanity, for the benefit of all beings. I activate the power of my essence nature, my Atma Shakti, and I connect to and embody my essence nature for the benefit of all beings. I shall not waste this golden opportunity. I shall use my time well. By the grace of the lineage and the power of my own practice, may I increasingly display and embody these signs of immersion into my own essence nature. And these signs are total self-acceptance, non-reactivity and clarity of view in all situations, taking responsibility for my own inner state, a sober connection to my real situation, an ability to reflect upon my mistakes without self-judgment, being free of attachment to praise and to blame, being free of complaint, being comfortable in my own skin, and experiencing effortless effort, ease and flow in life. Yes, may I increasingly display and embody these signs of immersion in my essence nature. May I birth a strong energy body that can digest all experiences. May I be free of ownership and denial of ownership. May I see all feelings as nothing but energy. May I digest my stories and realize my energy as pure power. May I wake up from the dream that the contents of thoughts describe or define me, and thereby realize the truth of who I am. May I have the pure motive, and may all beings benefit. Om. Placing your awareness inwardly, once again towards the eyebrow center, Pramadya. Visualizing, beginning to, once again, that light begins to emerge like a candle flame, or a miniature sun, radiating, illuminating. Keeping your awareness fixed upon these points as we explore chanting the mantra Om together 3 times. Breathing deeply in.